Laura and Pete sat in the departure lounge of Flight 3425 to Bali, holding hands. After all the preparations, it was nice to finally go through all the formalities. Laura closed her eyes. She needed this vacation. It had been a long year. Yes, 2 weeks of sunshine. Just what the doctor ordered. Pete let go of her hand to pull his phone out of his pocket when he heard the message alert. That reminds me, Laura, don't forget to put your phone in airplane mode. I didn't bring my phone with me. Pete was distracted looking at the phone screen. Laura was admiring his face when she saw it tense up. What's the matter, Pete? Pete nervously handed the phone over and she read, Peter Ower, raise your hand to this woman and you will regret it for the rest of your life. God, Pete, you're a fool. You must have warned your wife, she knows. Laura joined Pete, looking around at all the visible faces in the living room. Impossible, Laura. I packed everything last night when she was in bed and put the suitcases right in the car. She was nicer to me than ever before. It can't be her. Then it must be the wrong number, Pete. No, it mentions my name, you see. Could it be your husband? Don't be silly. He hasn't a clue either. He thinks I'm away on a 2-week course. Besides, how would he know your name and number? We've been incredibly careful. Absolutely no one knows about us. Whose number is it? I don't recognize anyone. I have some zany friends, and I don't think they'd want to play a prank on me. Tell you what, I'll call Penny and you call your husband. See if anything seems out of the ordinary to them. Laura watched Pete press the speed dial number. There was no answer, and he left a message saying he missed her already. Pete hung up and looked at Laura perplexed. Are you going to call your husband? I didn't bring my cell phone with me. You can use mine. Laura started to reach for the proffered phone, and then they both realized how stupid it was. For the first time, Laura began to regret the decision she had made. Further conversation was interrupted by a call about boarding the plane. They stood in line together, but they were no longer comfortable holding hands in public. Laura noticed Pete scanning the passengers looking for familiar faces. Laura was vaguely amused by this. He continued his search as they walked to their seats. They took their assigned seats, and once seated, Laura entwined her arm with his arm and rested her head on his shoulder. Why didn't you bring your cell phone with you, Laura? It's all part of my cunning plan. You'll be proud of me for it. I'll show you once we're in the air. Half an hour later, the plane gained altitude and Laura pulled her laptop out of her bag. She started it up and navigated to a Word document. I've invested in our future, lover. When my husband goes to bed tonight, he will find a letter from me. If he doesn't agree with what it says, we've lost nothing. And if he does, this trip will just be the beginning of a new life for both of us. Here's a copy. She handed the computer to Pete. My dear husband, I love you and only you and have loved you since we met 25 years ago. I hope to spend the next 25 years or more with you. This is what I have always wanted and what I sincerely wish for until now. I love you more and more every day and have happily dedicated my life to taking care of you and our wonderful children. With the exception of some visits to friends, I have asked for almost nothing for myself. I know you love me and would always want me to be happy and content. Since we love each other, I want to propose to you. I have purposely approached this so that you have 2 whole weeks to think about my idea. If we were to do it face to face, there would be a great danger of you becoming macho to me and saying something that we might not be able to get past. I can't take that risk. It's the same reason I left my phone there so you can't contact me for the entire 2 weeks. I'm not on a work course and no one there knows where I am, so don't waste your time trying to contact me. Darling, you are a wonderful lover and I never tire of being in your arms. However, I miss sex with other people so much that I risk incurring your wrath by doing what I do. Before you get too angry, just keep things in context. I'm going away for 2 weeks with a friend from work. I have never been unfaithful to you, and without your full blessing, I never will be. My proposal is as follows. With your blessing, I would like to do it with other men. I feel that my needs have grown so much that one man, even one as talented as you, cannot fulfill them. It will never be someone you know, and I promise to always be discreet. In fact, I will be so discreet that you won't even know when or where unless you want me to. At the slightest hint that anyone we know suspects what I am up to, I will stop immediately. You will always have me whenever you want me, and nothing about that will change. You are my husband, and your needs will always come first. I want you to be assured that this will not change the way I feel about you or our lovemaking together. In short, it will not affect us in any way. Think about it for the next 2 weeks, please, darling. If you love me as much as you say you do, you will jump at this opportunity to prove it. I know how much you love me, and that knowledge will be with me every time I fall asleep at night while I'm away. That's why I trust you to pamper me now. Please, dear, think about it for the next 2 weeks. If your answer is no, I will honor your wish and would appreciate the opportunity to talk more. I will try not to be too offended by the names you call me and your implied lack of trust. If your answer is yes, then all you have to say is, the answer is yes, and we need not talk about it anymore, though I would be happy to if you would like to. Your loving wife, Flora. Pete finished reading and just said, wow. Yes, that's good, isn't it? I have to admit that I borrowed many of the words from a story I saw on an erotic fiction website from a guy named Piggy33 who wrote We Need to Talk. Why did you call writing an investment in our future? Don't you get it? I asked my husband for permission. If he agrees, then when we get back we can move on with our lives without guilt. Laura mentally added, well, I can go on 2 weeks with you, and I'll be sure I don't need you anymore. But your replacement? That's a whole other story. You're so sure he'll agree to that? Of course. I've given the impression he has a choice, but that's only so he can convince himself he's in control. If he dares say no, then we'll have to keep sneaking around like we used to. Well, how do you like it? Not bad. Decisive and logical. However, it's a decision he'll never base on logic. I hope he's not a real man, otherwise it's a bit insulting. What? There's no way he could be offended by anything in that letter. It took me days to write it exactly. Yes, but you have to realize that you could have spent a whole year and still risk offending him. As a woman, you can never understand how a man's brain works. The main thing I took from that letter is that he is no longer able to satisfy you, and that no matter how good he is, he never will. You should know, Laura, that every man is a little paranoid about his work. The thought of leaving you for someone else who might be bigger or better only fuels that paranoia. Honestly, Laura, I can only see two reactions to him reading this. One is to give up and give in, the other is to go out swinging. Well, I think you're wrong. I know my husband. He will appreciate my honesty and give it serious thought. If I ask before I do something, it will be completely risk-free. Pete looked at his future lover and thought how much she herself believed her own nonsense. He was already seeing her in a new light. Sure, he was bending the truth to get this pass from his wife, but Laura's blatant lies and manipulation of her husband were unsettling to him. Part genuine curiosity and part devilishness drove him to his next question. How did the big guy story turn out for Laura? Did the lady get the best of her drink? He got his answer long before she opened her mouth. Her face suddenly became very serious. No, her husband kicked her out. To distract her from doubting whether she was doing the right thing, Peter changed the topic of conversation. After all the effort and expense of this trip, the last thing he wanted was for her conscience to wake up and actually do what the letter said. An innocent vacation. I didn't tell you about that weirdo I saw at international registration, did I? He was just standing 25 meters away from me while I was in line. When he saw me looking at him, He just stared at me and ran his index finger across my throat in a slashing motion. I looked around to see if he was doing it to someone behind me, but there was no one. It was creepy. Laura asked, "Yeah? What did he look like?" The world is full of strange, troubled people. That's the thing, Laura. He looked like a regular guy. Over 6 feet, dark hair, goatee. Peter stopped as Laura sat up abruptly and fumbled for her laptop again. She turned it on and navigated to some files. She pulled up a picture of herself and a man standing in front of the house. In a voice trembling with worry, she asked, "Is that him?" "It could be, Laura. It certainly looks a lot like him, but I can't be sure." Laura looked at Peter with interest. Did he have an incentive to lie to her? Was he afraid that if she became convinced her husband had figured out their games? For the first time, it occurred to Laura that Peter was a man who is willing to cheat on his wife and therefore fundamentally untrustworthy. What was that guy wearing, Pete? That's another woman's question, Laura. Guys don't notice what other guys are wearing. Didn't you say he dropped you off at the domestic terminal? Yes, I did. I convinced him to just drop me off and walk away. When I saw him leaving, I took the bus to the international terminal. So he must have gone back to his car, driven to the international terminal and parked, and then knew who to chase in the check-in line. Pretty unlikely, Laura. I think it's more likely that it was just a random psycho. He knew he had to distract Laura, who looked far from convinced. Is that your house in the picture, Laura? Laura, who also wanted a distraction and was used to people complimenting her on her house, went on autopilot. Yes, that's the one. It's beautiful, isn't it? We bought the beach house as an investment. It's very steep and narrow. You wouldn't believe the house is collapsible, would you? It took my husband 15 years, but he kept adding on and onto it and landscaping around it. You should see the inside of it. He is an artist, and each room has murals with a theme. Nautical theme in the bathrooms and living room. Business theme in the study. You walk into the study and the atmosphere says, "Work," and you work. I'm not going to tell you what the theme is in the bedroom. We've won all kinds of awards for the interior design and the way the house utilizes the land. There's even a creek running under the house. The conversation turned to the topic of their families, which they have so far skirted in their relationship. They talked about Pete's 2 children, ages 6 and 8. Laura talked about her 3. Sarah, a 23-year-old who had just graduated from law school and was working as a real estate lawyer, and her 2 children still at home, Daniel, 16, and Larry, 13. Laura didn't know it, but she tried desperately to distract herself. For a while she succeeded. Then she pulled out a notepad and wrote, "Lawyer, home, and children." Not knowing if her husband was following her, she couldn't make any plans for him. However, she knew she had to back herself up by protecting the house and family. After the couple fell silent, Laura began to berate herself for being a coward and not thinking about her situation or the possible situation. She pieced together the chronology of events. She had packed on Thursday evening, being careful not to include anything non-business or unreasonable to wear on the weekend between the 2 weekly courses. That evening her husband behaved perfectly normally. On Friday, she went to work at the usual time. They wanted to do some serious work on her company car, so she arranged for her husband to pick her up on Friday afternoon. He went into the reception area, waited for her to pack up, and drove her home. They had lunch with the kids, drove them to their grandparents' house, and then worked on it until late into the night. Saturday morning, an early rise, a trip to the airport. Laura remembered how nervous she was when she suggested her husband just take her bags to the check-in line and leave them. Other times he stayed until the plane took off. She was relieved when he immediately agreed. She'd watched him all the way to the parking lot and then waited for his car to pull away. Now his impatience to leave took on a darker meaning. She compared his behavior last night and today to her careful planning. Hell, No one from her job knew anything except that she'd taken annual leave, and her husband didn't know anyone from her job at all. He had no way of knowing what she was planning. The message that came to Pete's phone was a prank call from a friend, a guy staring at him in the check-in area, a random nutter. Relax, Laura. What would be the consequences if he found out? She lied to him about her destination, so what? The letter said she was traveling with a friend from work. It didn't specify if it was male or female. She didn't realize she'd closed her eyes until they opened. She imagined her husband knowing her final destination at the airport and realized how it would look to him. The deception would have to look like she had slipped away precisely to hide. That in itself was serious, but with some skill it could be defended. Combined with the contents of the letter, however, it was not in the slightest doubt. Laura used the rest of the flight to cover whatever she could. The first priority was to destroy the letter lying under a pillow 2,500 kilometers from her house. The second task was to convince herself that she was worrying unnecessarily about nothing. Laura, always ready to anticipate every possible scenario, wrote a long letter to Sarah, knowing she couldn't send it before Bali. In it, she begged her daughter to go to her house and do two things. The first was to take possession of her phone and switch it to Pete's number. She reasoned that she was embarrassed to tell anyone that she had forgotten it, and she had bought a prepaid phone for the trip. The second task was to retrieve the letter from under her father's pillow. She begged not to read it as it was deeply personal, written between husband and wife. Mother and daughter were very close, so she knew she could trust her to not only follow the instructions, but to be discreet about it. As an aside, Laura asked Sarah to acknowledge receipt of the letter and again notify her that she had done what she had been asked to do. As soon as Pete and Laura got off the plane at Denpasar Airport, Laura sent the letter, and then, figuring her husband wouldn't check the caller ID, called him from Pete's phone. None of her calls were answered then, or during the hour it took to get through customs and to their hotel. This had never happened before, and alarm bells were ringing in her head. Just before the cab pulled up to the hotel, Sarah called Pete's phone and confirmed that she had done as requested. Laura managed to dodge a few questions about what was going on. When Sarah asked if her father was okay, her answer horrified her mother. Her father had called to say that he had some things to think about and that he was taking the other children to his cabin in the country. Sarah was going to join them that evening. Laura asked her husband what he intended to do this weekend, and the answer, of course, did not include the cabin. Worse, the cabin was isolated from all 21st century modes of communication. Laura was so confused that she let her daughter make the call without further question. Chapter 2. Laura's husband has just cooked a barbecue dinner for his 3 children at the cottage. They're begging him to take them camping with him to get wallabies for their favorite campfire stew tomorrow. Sarah senses her father has been distracted since she arrived, but doesn't push him. They sit down for a family meeting. Sarah started the conversation. Is it about Mom, Dad? Yeah. She's been acting weird for a couple months now. Some kind of emotionally withdrawn. And yesterday, and this morning I learned some funny things. The sense of dread that gripped the room was only compounded by Dad's sigh as he finished that statement. They knew him as a strong but jovial man who was rarely serious. They waited. Your mom told me she's going on a 2-week course, long distance, for work. All 3 children confirmed that she told them so too. Yesterday afternoon she asked me to pick her up from work, so I did. Standing in the waiting room, I saw through the glass of one of the offices that she was talking to a man in his office. Something about the way they were standing or looking at each other didn't seem right. She didn't come out for more than 5 minutes, and I wandered around the reception area. There's a wall hung with pictures of all the high-ranking people in the company. I recognized the guy she was talking to. His name is Peter Auer. I picked up his business card at the front desk. This morning I just couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs. I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but I looked in your mother's purse. I found her passport in it, and looking through it, I found a visa stamp for Indonesia dated 3 weeks ago. I remembered seeing her reading a brochure about Bali last month. Their father paused and looked around the room, clearly contemplating what to say. Bali is in Indonesia and is not interstate, it's overseas. I didn't say anything to your mother, but accusing someone of deception without proof, especially someone you love unconditionally, is a bit much. Sarah interjected. We know, Dad, we were raised on your and Mom's values, remember? Never cheat, never lie. Always treat everyone with respect until they lose that respect, and then just quietly walk away. Yes, that's why what happened this morning is so hard to understand, let alone talk about. The somber feeling in the room intensified. They gave Dad as much time as he needed to gather his thoughts and decide what to say and how to say it. This morning your mom asked me to just drop her off at the domestic terminal and leave. She said she was nervous about leaving you home alone for too long. Purely willfully, I agreed, and then drove straight to the international terminal. I was waiting there next to check in for flights to Bali, and I saw Mr. Peter Hour checking in. I hid and kept watching. 15 minutes later, your mother showed up and checked in as well. I was too stunned to face her. You think? Yes, Sarah. I think your mother lied to me, to us really, and went to Bali to have an affair with someone she works with. The father turned away, but it was obvious to all three of his children that he was suffering greatly. They had never seen the great man cry and were willing to pay almost anything they had just to avoid seeing his obvious pain now. One by one, starting with Danielle, they enclosed their father in an embrace. Sarah took the lead again. What are you going to do, Dad? I just don't know, kids. But I do know that if she ever sleeps with another man, we're finished. Fidelity is the cornerstone of marriage, and any breach is unforgivable. If she hasn't and isn't sleeping with him, I still don't know if I can survive her cheating. So all I've done so far is send them both a message that if they touch each other, there will be trouble.